I stared at my only professional outfit hanging on the closet door of my cramped studio apartment as dawn broke through the thin curtains. The navy blazer bore a small coffee stain near the left pocket, and the matching pants showed a barely visible mend at the knee where I had carefully sewn a tear from catching it on my desk chair. Today was the biggest merger call of my career at Sterling Financial Group. $2.2 billion hanging in the balance. 3 years of 80-hour weeks building client relationships while watching others climb the corporate ladder had led to this moment. My phone buzzed against the nightstand. Conference room A9 a.m. sharp. The elevator doors opened to reveal Sterling Financial's executive floor, all polished marble and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle. I clutched my worn leather portfolio, the one my grandmother had given me when I graduated college with a finance degree and mountains of student debt. Conference Room A gleamed with its glass walls and mahogany table designed to impress visiting investors with our success and stability. I arrived 45 minutes early as always. The morning light streamed through the western windows as I carefully arranged my documents around the conference table's center seats. Every financial projection, regulatory compliance report, and market analysis had been triple-checked. 18 months of fieldwork across 12 rural states had gone into this presentation documenting telecommunications infrastructure gaps that our proposed acquisition could fill profitably. The door burst open at 8:35, and Jessica Sterling swept into the room like she owned it, which technically she did. Her father had built Sterling Financial from a small regional firm into a major player, but Jessica wore her inherited position like designer armor. Today's outfit probably cost more than my monthly rent: a charcoal Armani suit with subtle pinstripes, Italian leather shoes that clicked authoritatively against the marble floor, and a silk blouse the color of champagne. "Good morning, Marianne," she said, barely glancing in my direction as she set down her pristine Hermes briefcase. Her eyes swept over my carefully prepared workspace, then landed on my outfit with unmistakable disdain. "Do you even own a suit?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Several executives had begun filtering into the room. Robert Chen, our chief financial officer, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses nervously. Patricia Williams from legal carrying stacks of merger documents, and Sandra Mitchell from human resources, who always seemed to materialize whenever workplace tensions spiked. Jessica's laugh tinkled like breaking crystal. "I mean, we're representing Sterling Financial to Blackstone Capital today. Marcus Wellington expects a certain level of professionalism. You know how important first impressions are in this business." My cheeks burned as other executives exchanged glances. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably, studying his smartphone with sudden intensity. Patricia busied herself organizing contracts she had already organized twice. Sandra's expression remained carefully neutral, but I caught her making a note on her tablet. "Perhaps you should consider shopping at Nordstrom." Jessica continued settling into the chair I had positioned at the table's head, directly facing the large monitor where our video conference would display. "They have excellent sales, and professional appearance really does matter when you're dealing with investors of Marcus Wellington's caliber." I said nothing, focusing on my notes while my face burned with humiliation. 3 years of building relationships with rural telecommunications commissioners, mapping fiber optic infrastructure across Montana and Wyoming, analyzing customer demographics in markets everyone else had written off as unprofitable. All of it reduced to the coffee stain on my blazer. David Sterling entered at 8:55, commanding the room's attention effortlessly. At 55, he still carried himself like the ambitious young entrepreneur who had started Sterling Financial 30 years ago with nothing but determination and a business loan. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccably tailored, and his presence reminded everyone why he had built a company worth acquiring for over $2 billion. "Ready for the big day?" He asked, his eyes scanning the assembled team before settling on Jessica with obvious pride. Marcus Wellington doesn't usually take meetings with firms our size. This is our chance to join the major leagues. Jessica straightened in her chair, clearly relishing her father's attention. Everything's prepared, Dad. I've reviewed all the strategic positioning, and I'm confident we can demonstrate Sterling Financial's value proposition effectively. I bit my tongue, remembering the late nights I had spent preparing those strategic analyses while Jessica attended networking events and charity galas. The irony wasn't lost on me that my work would be presented by someone who couldn't identify Montana on a map without assistance. The conference room's technology came alive as our IT support connected us to Blackstone Capital's New York headquarters. Multiple screens displayed financial charts, market projections, and legal frameworks that would govern our proposed partnership. Everything I had researched, documented, and verified over the past year and a half appeared on those screens, ready to be presented by someone else. Remember, David said, straightening his tie. Marcus Wellington built Blackstone Capital into one of the most respected investment firms in the country. He's known for demanding excellence and cutting through corporate nonsense. Just be professional, be confident, and show him why Sterling Financial deserves his partnership. Jessica nodded eagerly, her confidence radiating like perfume. She had positioned herself perfectly in the camera's view while I sat slightly behind and to the left, my stained blazer mercifully out of frame. The other executives arranged themselves around the table's perimeter, ready to provide support as needed. The video conference indicator showed an incoming connection from New York. In seconds, we would be face to face with one of the financial industry's most influential figures, and my 3 years of groundwork would be judged by someone who had just mocked my appearance and questioned my professionalism. The screen flickered to life, revealing Marcus Wellington's corner office in Manhattan. Even through the video connection, his presence commanded respect. At 62, he possessed the sharp-eyed intensity that had made Blackstone Capital legendary in investment circles. His silver hair was meticulously groomed. His charcoal suit spoke of Savile Row tailoring, and his mahogany desk displayed awards from financial publications alongside family photographs that suggested old money and East Coast establishment connections. "Good morning, Sterling Financial," Marcus said, his cultured Boston accent carrying the authority of someone accustomed to deference. "I trust everyone is prepared for our discussion." "Absolutely," Jessica responded, immediately leaning forward with practiced enthusiasm. "Mr. Wellington, I'm Jessica Sterling, Vice President of Strategic Development and daughter of our CEO. I've been leading the development of our rural telecommunications initiative, and I'm thrilled to present our partnership opportunity." I noticed Amanda Brooks, Marcus's chief of staff, seated to his left with a legal pad already covered in notes. Her reputation for thorough preparation preceded her. Harvard Law Review editor, former federal prosecutor, and Marcus's trusted advisor for over a decade. She studied our team with analytical precision, her pen moving steadily as she documented first impressions. Behind them, I could see Robert Chen and Timothy Walsh, Marcus's investment partners, along with several other Blackstone representatives whose names I recognized from financial publications. This wasn't just a preliminary meeting. Marcus had assembled his entire decision-making team. "Excellent," Marcus replied, though his expression remained neutral. "I've reviewed your preliminary materials, and I'm particularly interested in your rural market analysis. The telecommunications infrastructure gaps you've identified represent significant untapped potential." Jessica's smile broadened. "Exactly. Our strategic framework identifies synergistic opportunities across multiple demographic segments, leveraging technological innovations to optimize market penetration while maintaining sustainable profit margins." I winced internally. Jessica's MBA vocabulary couldn't mask her fundamental lack of understanding about the markets we were discussing. She was reciting business school buzzwords while Marcus sought specific, actionable intelligence. Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. That's very interesting. Can you elaborate on your regulatory compliance strategies for the Montana Public Service Commission? I understand their fiber optic infrastructure requirements changed significantly last year. Jessica hesitated for perhaps 3 seconds too long. Our team has conducted comprehensive regulatory analysis across all target markets. We're confident in our compliance frameworks moving forward. I see. Marcus's tone suggested polite skepticism. And what about the Wyoming telecommunications tax incentives that expired in March? How does that impact your projected return on investment calculations? Another pause longer this time. Jessica glanced briefly toward Robert Chen, who was studying his documents with sudden intensity. We're monitoring all regulatory developments closely. Our financial projections incorporate various scenario planning models to ensure robust returns regardless of policy changes. Amanda Brooks made another note, her expression unreadable but focused. I could see Timothy Walsh leaning forward slightly, his attention sharpening as Jessica's responses grew increasingly vague. Of course, Marcus continued, his voice maintaining professional courtesy while his eyes grew more analytical. And the customer acquisition costs in rural markets. I imagine those differ significantly from urban telecommunications strategies. What data are you using for your projections? Jessica's confidence began showing hairline cracks. Our research indicates substantial market opportunities across multiple customer segments. We're leveraging innovative approaches to customer acquisition that optimize cost-effectiveness while maintaining service quality standards. I had conducted customer interviews in 47 rural communities across 5 states, documenting everything from average household income to preferred communication channels for marketing outreach. Those conversations had revealed insights about rural customer behavior that contradicted every assumption Jessica was making. But I remained silent, still stinging from her earlier humiliation. Marcus exchanged a glance with Amanda, a communication so brief I almost missed it. That's fascinating. Could you share some specific examples of these innovative approaches? I'm always interested in creative solutions to challenging market dynamics. Well, Jessica began, then paused to gather her thoughts. We're implementing multi-channel strategic initiatives that leverage both traditional and digital touchpoints to maximize engagement across diverse demographic profiles. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably. Marcus's fingers drummed once against his desk, a gesture so subtle it might have been unconscious. Behind him, Timothy Walsh was reviewing documents with renewed intensity, while Amanda Brooks continued taking notes with mechanical precision. I think what Jessica means, David Sterling interjected, his voice carefully measured, is that we've developed comprehensive market research based on extensive fieldwork in target communities. Perhaps we should dive deeper into the specific data points. Marcus nodded slowly. Yes, I think that would be helpful. The preliminary reports mention detailed demographic analysis and infrastructure assessments. I'd like to understand your methodology more clearly. Jessica's composure recovered slightly with her father's support. Absolutely. Our methodology incorporates best practices from leading business schools, utilizing both quantitative and qualitative research approaches to develop actionable market intelligence. Excellent, Marcus replied, though his enthusiasm seemed measured. Can you walk me through your analysis of broadband adoption rates in communities with populations under 5,000? That segment represents significant potential, but it requires specialized understanding of rural consumer behavior. I watched Jessica's face carefully, knowing she couldn't answer that question without referring to research she hadn't conducted. The communities I had visited ranged from farming towns in eastern Montana to mining communities in Wyoming, each with distinct demographic profiles and infrastructure challenges that demanded customized approaches. That's certainly an important market segment, Jessica said, her voice slightly tighter than before. Our analysis indicates substantial opportunities for strategic positioning in underserved markets, particularly through innovative service delivery models that address unique rural infrastructure challenges. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful but increasingly distant. The video call continued, but something fundamental had shifted in the room's energy. Amanda Brooks was writing faster now, her notes covering multiple pages, while Timothy Walsh had begun whispering to another Blackstone representative off-camera. The morning sun had shifted, casting different shadows across our conference room as Jessica continued speaking in generalities about markets she had never visited and customers she had never met. My detailed research sat in folders at my elbow, 3 years of work reduced to buzzwords and business school platitudes. Marcus Wellington's questions became increasingly specific, probing the foundation of our rural telecommunications strategy with surgical precision. I recognized his technique from articles I had read about his investment approach. He preferred to understand markets from the ground up, building comprehensive pictures of opportunities and risks before committing Blackstone Capital's resources. Let me ask about something more specific, Marcus said, his attention focused entirely on Jessica. Your materials mention fiber optic infrastructure challenges in communities along the Montana-Wyoming border. What's your assessment of the coordination challenges between state regulatory authorities in that region? Jessica's hesitation lasted longer this time. I had spent 2 weeks in Billings and Sheridan meeting with state commissioners and learning about jurisdictional complexities that affected every aspect of infrastructure development. The Montana Public Service Commission and Wyoming Public Service Commission operated under different regulatory frameworks, creating compliance challenges that required careful navigation. Cross-border regulatory coordination presents various challenges, Jessica said carefully. Our analysis identifies opportunities for streamlined approaches that leverage regulatory efficiencies while maintaining compliance standards. Amanda Brooks looked up from her notes, making eye contact with Marcus for the first time during the call. Her expression suggested growing concern about the gap between our written materials and Jessica's presentation capabilities. Specifically, Marcus continued, how do the different environmental review requirements affect infrastructure timeline projections? Montana requires environmental assessments for projects crossing certain watershed boundaries, while Wyoming focuses more heavily on wildlife migration patterns. How does that impact your implementation schedule? My stomach tightened as I watched Jessica's composure crumble in real time. She had never read the environmental compliance reports I had compiled after consultations with both state environmental agencies. Those differences weren't theoretical. They represented months of potential delays if not properly managed. Environmental compliance is certainly a priority, Jessica responded, her voice betraying increasing strain. We're committed to working closely with all relevant regulatory authorities to ensure proper environmental stewardship throughout our implementation process. Timothy Walsh leaned forward, his involvement indicating escalating concern among the Blackstone team. Ms. Sterling, the preliminary materials included very detailed analysis of specific compliance timelines. Could you elaborate on the watershed boundary considerations you mentioned? Those seem particularly relevant to your projected 18-month implementation schedule. The question hung in the air like an accusation. I had mapped every major watershed boundary between Billings and Casper, documenting which projects would trigger extended environmental reviews and which could proceed under standard permitting processes. That research had taken 3 months of coordination with environmental consultants and regulatory officials. Jessica glanced toward her father, then back at the camera. Our team has conducted thorough environmental analysis across all project areas. We're confident in our timeline projections based on comprehensive regulatory review. Your team, Marcus repeated slowly, his tone suggesting careful consideration of Jessica's phrasing. Could you introduce the team members responsible for this environmental analysis? I'd like to understand their expertise and methodology. David Sterling shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I could see him recognizing that Jessica's preparation had been inadequate for Marcus Wellington's detailed questioning style. The gap between our written materials and her presentation abilities was becoming impossible to ignore. Of course, Jessica said, her voice brightening artificially. Our environmental analysis reflects collaborative efforts across multiple departments, incorporating expertise from our strategic development team, our regulatory compliance specialists, and our field research coordinators. I see, Marcus replied. And who led the field research efforts? The analysis suggests extensive on-site investigation and stakeholder consultation. That level of detail requires significant time and specialized knowledge of rural telecommunications infrastructure. The moment I had been dreading arrived with mathematical inevitability. Jessica couldn't identify the team leader because she couldn't identify the team. The field research had been conducted by one person over 18 months of travel documentation and relationship building in communities most people couldn't locate without GPS assistance. Let me connect you with our research team leader, Jessica said, finally acknowledging the limits of her knowledge. Marianne Williams served as our primary field research coordinator for this project. Every eye in the room turned toward me. After an hour of watching Jessica fumble questions about my work, I suddenly found myself thrust into direct conversation with one of the most influential investors in American finance. My coffee-stained blazer felt heavier under their collective gaze. Ms. Williams, Marcus said, his attention shifting to focus directly on me through the camera. Could you walk me through your methodology for the environmental compliance analysis? I'm particularly interested in how you identified the watershed boundary considerations. I took a breath, organizing 3 years of research into concise, accessible explanations. I conducted site visits to 43 potential infrastructure locations between Billings and Sheridan, coordinating with local environmental consultants and regulatory officials to map jurisdictional boundaries. The watershed considerations affect projects crossing the Powder River Basin, where Montana requires additional environmental impact assessments for any infrastructure development within 2 miles of tributary streams. Marcus's expression sharpened with interest. And the Wyoming regulations. Wyoming focuses on seasonal wildlife migration patterns, particularly for pronghorn antelope and elk herds that cross potential infrastructure corridors between October and April. Projects in those areas require wildlife impact mitigation plans, which add approximately 90 to 120 days to the permitting timeline. Amanda Brooks was writing rapidly, her attention completely focused on my responses. I noticed Timothy Walsh nodding slightly, his expression suggesting recognition of detailed, practical knowledge that matched the written materials they had reviewed. Excellent, Marcus said. That level of detail explains the implementation timeline projections in your analysis. How did you coordinate stakeholder consultations across both states? For the first time in the meeting, I felt confident discussing work I understood completely. I established relationships with regional planning commissions, tribal government representatives, and local business associations in each target community. The stakeholder consultation process revealed significant variations in community priorities. Ranching communities prioritize maintaining existing land use patterns, while mining communities focus more heavily on economic development opportunities. Jessica sat motionless beside me, her earlier confidence replaced by growing awareness that the conversation had moved far beyond her expertise. The questions Marcus asked required detailed knowledge that couldn't be summarized in MBA buzzwords or strategic frameworks. And customer acquisition strategies, Marcus continued. Rural markets require different approaches than urban telecommunications expansion. What did your stakeholder consultations reveal about effective marketing channels? I had conducted focus groups in community centers, interviewed business owners in coffee shops, and attended town hall meetings where residents discussed their communication needs. Those conversations had revealed insights that challenged every assumption about rural customer behavior. Rural customers prioritize reliability over speed, and they prefer local business relationships over corporate customer service centers. Effective marketing requires community-based approaches, sponsoring local events, partnering with agricultural associations, and demonstrating long-term community commitment rather than focusing on price competition or technical specifications. The energy in the room had shifted dramatically. Marcus's questions became more engaged, exploring nuances of market analysis that reflected genuine interest rather than perfunctory due diligence. Amanda Brooks continued taking extensive notes while Timothy Walsh began asking follow-up questions that demonstrated serious consideration of our partnership potential. Jessica remained silent, her expression carefully controlled, but her body language suggesting growing discomfort with her diminished role in the conversation. She had positioned herself as the strategic leader, but the discussion had revealed the gap between strategic planning and operational expertise. Marcus Wellington's engagement intensified as our conversation progressed beyond environmental compliance into market dynamics and competitive positioning. His questions revealed the analytical depth that had made Blackstone Capital legendary for identifying undervalued opportunities in complex markets. Ms. Williams, your analysis mentions significant variations in customer behavior patterns between agricultural and mining communities. Could you elaborate on those differences and how they impact service delivery strategies? I drew from 18 months of community visits, remembering conversations with ranchers who needed reliable communication for livestock monitoring and mine supervisors who required high-bandwidth data transmission for equipment diagnostics. Agricultural customers typically require consistent weather-resistant service across large geographic areas. Their communication needs spike during calving season and harvest periods, but remain relatively stable throughout the year. Mining communities need higher data transmission capabilities for industrial equipment monitoring, but their customer concentration allows for more intensive infrastructure investment in smaller geographic areas. Timothy Walsh leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. That suggests different pricing strategies and infrastructure investment priorities. How did you factor those considerations into your financial projections? Agricultural areas require extensive fiber optic networks with lower customer density, which creates higher per-customer infrastructure costs, but more predictable long-term revenue streams. Mining communities allow for concentrated infrastructure investment with higher immediate returns, but they're subject to commodity price volatility that affects customer retention. Amanda Brooks looked up from her notes, making eye contact with Marcus again. Her expressions suggested professional recognition of analysis that matched Blackstone Capital's investment criteria. What about competitive positioning? How do existing telecommunications providers serve these markets? I had researched every major provider in our target regions, documenting service gaps and customer satisfaction issues that represented opportunity for new market entrants. Current providers focus on urban and suburban markets, treating rural areas as secondary priorities. Customer service is typically handled through remote call centers, and technical support often requires extended wait times for on-site repairs. Local customers consistently expressed frustration with corporate policies that don't accommodate rural business practices. Marcus nodded slowly, his expression suggesting growing appreciation for the depth of research underlying our proposal. And your recommendation for addressing those service gaps? Establish regional service centers staffed by local technicians who understand rural business operations. Partner with agricultural equipment dealers and mining supply companies to provide integrated communication solutions. Focus on building long-term relationships rather than competing solely on price or technical specifications. Jessica had remained silent throughout this exchange, but I noticed her shifting uncomfortably as Marcus's questions continued bypassing her involvement. Her carefully crafted image as project leader was dissolving under scrutiny that revealed her fundamental unfamiliarity with the markets she claimed to understand. "Fascinating," Marcus said. "Those insights align with Blackstone Capital's investment philosophy regarding underserved markets. How did you validate your customer acquisition cost projections?" "I conducted surveys in 12 communities, documenting average household income, existing communication expenses, and willingness to pay for improved service. The data revealed that rural customers are willing to pay premium prices for reliable service, but they expect corresponding improvements in customer support and technical assistance." Timothy Walsh made a note, then looked directly at the camera. "Ms. Williams, your field research appears comprehensive, but I'm curious about implementation challenges. What obstacles did you identify that might affect our projected timeline?" I had anticipated this question, having documented every potential obstacle during my community visits. Local permitting processes vary significantly between jurisdictions. Some communities require extensive public hearings, while others streamline approvals for economic development projects. Weather constraints affect construction during winter months, and workforce availability can be limited in remote areas, particularly for specialized technical positions. "How did you factor those constraints into your timeline projections?" Marcus asked. "I mapped the optimal construction sequence to maximize weather-appropriate work periods, identified local contractors with appropriate expertise, and developed contingency plans for extended permitting processes. The 18-month timeline assumes coordinated project management across multiple jurisdictions, with built-in buffers for seasonal and regulatory delays." Amanda Brooks was writing continuously now, her notes covering multiple pages, as she documented detailed responses that clearly exceeded expectations for preliminary partnership discussions. I noticed her making specific annotations that suggested serious consideration of our proposal. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful but engaged. "This level of analysis suggests extensive time investment in market research. How long did your fieldwork require?" 18 months of site visits, stakeholder consultations, and regulatory coordination. I traveled approximately 30,000 miles across 5 states, conducting on-site assessments and building relationships with local officials and business leaders. The silence that followed carried weight. Jessica's discomfort became more obvious as she realized the conversation had moved completely beyond her involvement. Her strategic frameworks and MBA buzzwords couldn't compete with detailed operational knowledge gained through direct market engagement. "Impressive," Marcus said finally. "That kind of commitment to understanding market fundamentals reflects the analytical approach Blackstone Capital values in potential partners." Jessica attempted to rejoin the conversation, her voice carrying forced enthusiasm. "Marianne's fieldwork reflects Sterling Financial's commitment to thorough market analysis. Our strategic approach emphasizes comprehensive research as the foundation for successful market entry." Marcus's attention shifted back to Jessica, but his expression seemed less engaged than during his conversation with me. "Of course. And how do you see Sterling Financial's leadership structure supporting this rural telecommunications initiative moving forward?" The question carried implications that made David Sterling shift in his seat. Jessica's role as project leader had been effectively undermined by her inability to discuss work she claimed to have directed. The gap between her position and her expertise had become impossible to ignore. "Our leadership team brings diverse expertise to complex project management," Jessica responded carefully. "We're committed to leveraging our best talent to ensure successful implementation." "Naturally," Marcus replied, though his tone suggested polite rather than enthusiastic interest. "Ms. Williams, from your perspective, what would you identify as the critical success factors for this partnership? The question was directed to me, but it represented implicit recognition that my expertise had become central to evaluating Sterling Financial's capabilities. Jessica's expression remained carefully controlled, but her silence spoke volumes about the power shift that had occurred during our presentation. I realized this moment would determine not just our partnership prospects, but my own professional future. Marcus Wellington was asking me to evaluate our company's readiness for a $2.2 billion merger, and my answer would be recorded and analyzed by some of the most influential investors in American finance. Marcus Wellington called for a 5-minute recess, his tone professional, but carrying an undertone that suggested serious deliberation among the Blackstone Capital team. As soon as the video connection muted, Jessica turned toward me with barely contained fury, her polished composure cracking like fine porcelain under pressure. "Remember who signs your paychecks," she hissed, her voice low enough to avoid the microphones but sharp enough to cut glass. "This is a senior-level strategic discussion, not a technical review session. Stay in your lane and let me handle the business development aspects." David Sterling was engaged in urgent whispered consultation with Robert Chen and Patricia Williams, their expressions suggesting growing concern about Jessica's performance. Sandra Mitchell sat quietly in the corner, her tablet active as she documented workplace dynamics that would likely require follow-up discussions. I said nothing, focusing on organizing my notes while processing the implicit threat Jessica had just delivered. 3 years of 80-hour weeks building relationships and developing expertise that had made this meeting possible, reduced to a reminder about hierarchical authority and financial dependency. The video connection reactivated, revealing Marcus Wellington's team in what appeared to be intense consultation. Amanda Brooks had multiple documents spread across the conference table, while Timothy Walsh was reviewing materials on a laptop computer. Other Blackstone representatives remained visible in the background, their engagement suggesting this meeting had exceeded preliminary discussion and moved into serious partnership evaluation.
"Thank you for your patience,"
Marcus said, his attention focused directly on our camera.
"We've been reviewing the materials you provided. We have some follow-up questions that require clarification."
David Sterling straightened in his chair, his expression carefully optimistic.
"Of course. We're prepared to address any concerns or provide additional information."
Marcus nodded, but his attention shifted immediately past David and Jessica to focus directly on me.
"Ms. Williams, during our brief recess, we took the opportunity to verify some of the regulatory information you discussed. We spoke with Commissioner Patricia Hendricks at the Montana Public Service Commission, who mentioned extensive conversations with someone from Sterling Financial regarding fiber optic infrastructure compliance. Would that have been you? My heart stopped for approximately 3 seconds. Marcus Wellington's team had spent their 5-minute break fact-checking my responses in real time, contacting regulatory officials who could verify or contradict the information I had provided. The implications were staggering. Blackstone Capital was conducting due diligence with the thoroughness and speed that had made them legendary in investment circles.
"Yes," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt.
"Commissioner Hendricks and I discussed compliance requirements for projects crossing watershed boundaries. We also reviewed the updated environmental assessment protocols that went into effect last September." Amanda Brooks made another note, her expression suggesting confirmation rather than surprise. "And Commissioner Martinez at the Wyoming Public Service Commission mentioned similar consultations regarding wildlife migration impact assessments. Those conversations occurred over approximately how long a time period?" Jessica's face had drained of color as she realized Marcus's team was systematically verifying information that she couldn't have provided. The regulatory relationships I had built over 18 months represented professional credibility that couldn't be fabricated or transferred.
"Approximately 14 months, I answered.
Commissioner Martinez and I maintained regular communication throughout the wildlife impact assessment process, particularly during migration season, when construction activities require coordination with state wildlife management protocols. Timothy Walsh leaned forward, his involvement indicating escalating Blackstone capital interest in details that went far beyond preliminary partnership discussions. Ms. Williams, we also contacted the Sheridan County Economic Development Office. Director Thompson spoke very highly of someone from Sterling Financial who attended multiple community planning meetings and provided technical expertise for local infrastructure assessments. I assume that was also you. The room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Jessica realized the scope of verification Marcus's team had conducted. They weren't just confirming regulatory compliance. They were documenting professional relationships that established credibility and market access throughout our target region. Yes, I confirmed. Director Thompson and I worked together on infrastructure assessments for 3 potential project sites in Sheridan County. He provided local market intelligence while I contributed technical analysis of telecommunications infrastructure requirements. Marcus exchanged glances with Amanda Brooks, a communication that suggested professional recognition of relationship building that aligned with Blackstone Capital's investment methodology. And these relationships extend across how many communities? 43 communities across 5 states. I maintained regular communication with local economic development offices, regulatory officials, and business associations throughout the market research process. The silence that followed carried enormous weight. Jessica sat motionless beside me, her carefully constructed image as project leader completely undermined by evidence that she had never visited the communities or met the officials who were fundamental to our partnership proposal. Marcus's expression grew more serious, his tone shifting from evaluation to investigation. This is very interesting, Ms. Sterling. Could you help me understand the relationship between your strategic oversight and Ms. Williams' field research? How did you coordinate her work with your overall project management? Jessica's hesitation lasted long enough to become uncomfortable. She had been caught claiming credit for work she hadn't supervised, relationships she hadn't built, and expertise she didn't possess. Marianne's fieldwork supported our strategic framework development. I provided overall direction while she handled operational implementation. I see, Marcus replied, though his tone suggested growing skepticism. And how frequently did you review her progress and findings during the 18-month research period? Another pause, longer and more damaging. Jessica couldn't describe review meetings that had never occurred or guidance she had never provided. We maintained regular coordination throughout the project development process. Timothy Walsh looked directly at the camera, his attention focused on Jessica with analytical intensity. Could you elaborate on the strategic insights that emerged from Ms. Williams' field research? How did her findings influence your overall market entry strategy? The question was devastating because it required Jessica to demonstrate knowledge she didn't possess about research she hadn't supervised. Her strategic frameworks couldn't substitute for detailed understanding of specific communities, regulatory requirements, and customer behavior patterns that had emerged from extensive fieldwork. The research confirmed our strategic assumptions about market opportunities in underserved rural areas, Jessica said carefully. Our framework anticipated the regulatory and operational challenges that Marianne's fieldwork documented. Marcus's expression grew increasingly distant, his professional politeness unable to mask growing concerns about the gap between Jessica's claims and demonstrable expertise. Amanda Brooks was writing, continuously documenting responses that would likely be analyzed extensively after our meeting concluded. Of course, Marcus said. And when you developed these strategic assumptions, what sources did you use for understanding rural telecommunications markets? I'm curious about your methodology for anticipating the specific regulatory and operational challenges
that Ms. Williams later documented, Jessica was trapped by her own claims of strategic leadership. She couldn't identify sources she hadn't consulted or methodologies she hadn't developed. Her MBA training provided frameworks for analyzing markets, but it couldn't substitute for the detailed operational knowledge that Marcus was demanding. Our strategic analysis incorporated industry best practices and market research from leading telecommunications consulting firms, she said, falling back on generic business school responses that clearly frustrated Marcus's desire for specific, actionable intelligence. The video call continued, but the dynamic had shifted fundamentally. Marcus Wellington was no longer evaluating Sterling Financial's partnership potential. He was investigating the accuracy of our representation and the credibility of our leadership claims. Marcus Wellington's expression had evolved from professional interest to analytical concern as he processed the discrepancies between Jessica's claimed leadership role and her demonstrable knowledge of the project she supposedly directed. His next words carried the weight of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected billions of dollars and hundreds of careers. "Mr. Sterling, I'd like to request a brief private conversation with you. Could we ask the other team members to step away temporarily with the exception of Ms. Williams? I have some concerns that require immediate clarification." David Sterling's face registered alarm as he recognized the implications of Marcus's request. Private conversations during partnership negotiations typically indicated serious problems that required executive-level resolution. Jessica's expression showed growing panic as she realized her exclusion from the discussion meant her credibility had been fundamentally compromised. "Of course," David said, his voice carefully controlled. "Jessica Robert, Patricia Sandra. Could you give us a few minutes?" Jessica hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave a conversation that would determine her professional future. "Dad, I think I should stay to provide context about the strategic development process." "Now, Jessica," David said firmly, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. The authority in his voice reminded everyone that despite family relationships, he remained CEO of a company facing a critical business decision. As the others filed out of the conference room, I remained seated at the table, uncertain why Marcus had requested my presence during what appeared to be a disciplinary conversation with David Sterling. The video connection remained active, showing Marcus, Amanda Brooks, and Timothy Walsh in serious consultation. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus began once the room had cleared, "I'm going to be direct because Blackstone Capital's reputation depends on working with partners who demonstrate integrity and operational competence. What we've discovered during this call raises significant concerns about Sterling Financial's internal management and representation accuracy." David's shoulders sagged slightly as he prepared for what clearly would be an uncomfortable conversation. "What specific concerns?" Amanda Brooks consulted her extensive notes before responding. "Our verification calls revealed that Ms. Williams conducted all regulatory liaison work, stakeholder consultation, and market research independently over an 18-month period. Meanwhile, your daughter claims strategic oversight and project leadership for work she appears to have neither supervised nor contributed to meaningfully." The silence that followed was deafening. David Sterling sat motionless, processing accusations that threatened both his company's partnership prospects and his family relationships. I felt like an unwilling witness to corporate and personal drama that exceeded anything I had anticipated when I arrived for work that morning. Timothy Walsh leaned forward, his expression serious, but not unsympathetic. "More concerning, we discovered email communications suggesting that Ms. Jessica Sterling specifically excluded Ms. Williams from client meetings and strategic planning sessions related to projects Ms. Williams had researched and developed." My stomach dropped as I realized Marcus's team had conducted background investigation that extended far beyond regulatory verification.
They had accessed internal communications that documented Jessica's systematic efforts to marginalize my contributions while claiming credit for my work. How did you obtain internal email communications? David asked, his voice tight with growing alarm. Marcus's expression remained professional but firm. Blackstone Capital conducts thorough due diligence on all potential partners. We have relationships with cybersecurity firms that can verify corporate communication patterns when partnership integrity is questioned. What we found suggests a pattern of intellectual property misrepresentation and workplace harassment that violates our partnership criteria. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. David Sterling's company faced losing a $2.2 billion partnership because his daughter had systematically taken credit for my work while excluding me from recognition and advancement opportunities. Amanda Brooks consulted another document. Specifically, we found email chains where Ms. Jessica Sterling directed other employees to exclude Ms. Williams from client presentations for projects Ms. Williams had developed. We also found communications where Ms. Jessica Sterling explicitly claimed credit for research and analysis she had not conducted. David's face had gone ashen as he processed the legal and financial implications of what Marcus was describing. Intellectual property theft and workplace harassment represented not just partnership deal breakers, but potential grounds for lawsuits that could devastate Sterling Financial's reputation and financial stability. Additionally, Timothy Walsh continued, we found communications suggesting that Ms. Jessica Sterling was aware of her misrepresentation, but continued claiming credit for Ms. Williams' work in presentations to other potential partners and clients. I sat frozen as I listened to Marcus's team systematically documenting 3 years of workplace injustice with precision that suggested extensive investigation capabilities. They weren't just evaluating our partnership proposal, they were conducting forensic analysis of corporate behavior patterns. Marcus leaned forward, his expression grave but not unsympathetic to David's position. Mr. Sterling, Blackstone Capital has built our reputation on partnering with companies that demonstrate operational integrity and ethical leadership. What we've discovered suggests fundamental problems with Sterling Financial's management practices and internal accountability. David Sterling aged visibly as he processed the implications for his company, his family, and his professional legacy. What are you asking me to do? We're asking you to choose, Amanda Brooks replied with clinical precision. Blackstone Capital will proceed with this partnership under one condition. Ms. Williams must be given authority commensurate with her expertise and contributions. Ms. Jessica Sterling must be removed from any role related to this project. The ultimatum landed with devastating force. David Sterling faced choosing between his daughter's career and his company's future, between family loyalty and business integrity, between personal relationships and professional survival. Marcus's voice softened slightly, acknowledging the personal difficulty of the situation. Mr. Sterling, we respect the challenges of family business dynamics, but Blackstone Capital cannot partner with organizations where expertise is undermined by nepotism and intellectual property is misrepresented systematically. Timothy Walsh added, we're prepared to offer Ms. Williams a position with Blackstone Capital if Sterling Financial cannot provide appropriate recognition for her contributions. Her expertise in rural telecommunications markets aligns perfectly with our investment strategy. The room fell silent as David Sterling processed an impossible decision. Jessica's career at Sterling Financial, his family relationships, and his company's partnership prospects all hung in the balance while I sat witnessing the intersection of corporate justice and personal devastation. Marcus waited patiently, his expression suggesting understanding of the human complexity underlying business decisions, but his silence also conveying that Blackstone Capital's terms were non-negotiable. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before David Sterling straightened in his chair.
his expression revealing the difficult decision he had reached. As CEO, he had built Sterling Financial through 3 decades of principled business practices, and that legacy now demanded choosing integrity over family comfort.
"Bring Jessica back in,"
he said quietly, his voice carrying resignation and resolve in equal measure. When Jessica returned to the conference room, her confident demeanor had been replaced by obvious anxiety. She took her seat carefully, her eyes darting between her father's grave expression and the Blackstone Capital team's serious faces on the video screen. Marcus Wellington spoke with the measured precision of someone delivering a verdict that would reshape careers and corporate futures. "Ms. Sterling, our investigation has revealed systematic misrepresentation of project leadership and intellectual property appropriation over an extended period. Blackstone Capital cannot proceed with partnerships where expertise is undermined and credit is misallocated." Jessica's face went completely white as the implications hit her. "I don't understand what you're suggesting." Amanda Brooks consulted her notes with clinical detachment. "We have documented evidence that you claimed credit for Ms. Williams' research, excluded her from client meetings for projects she developed, and misrepresented your role in work you neither supervised nor contributed to meaningfully." "That's not accurate," Jessica protested, her voice rising with desperation. "I provided strategic oversight and project direction. Marianne handled operational implementation under my guidance." Timothy Walsh leaned forward, his expression suggesting patience exhausted by continued misrepresentation. "Ms. Sterling, we have email communications where you explicitly directed staff to exclude Ms. Williams from presentations while you claimed credit for her work. We have regulatory officials confirming 18 months of direct communication with Ms. Williams that you were not involved in. We have community leaders describing extensive collaboration with Ms. Williams that you never participated in." The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Jessica's carefully constructed narrative collapsed under systematic verification that revealed the gap between her claims and reality. Her strategic frameworks couldn't substitute for documented proof of who had actually conducted the work. Marcus Wellington delivered the final verdict with professional courtesy that couldn't mask its devastating impact. "Blackstone Capital will proceed with this partnership under specific conditions. Ms. Williams will be promoted to Senior Vice President of Rural Market Development, reporting directly to the Board of Directors. She will lead the integration project with full authority and appropriate compensation. Ms. Jessica Sterling's employment with Sterling Financial will be terminated immediately." David Sterling closed his eyes briefly, processing the cost of his company's survival. When he opened them, his expression showed painful acceptance of necessary consequences. "I understand and accept your terms." Jessica turned toward her father with disbelief and growing fury. "Dad, you can't be serious. This is our family company. You're going to destroy my career for a $2 billion deal." "Jessica," David said quietly, his voice carrying 3 decades of business experience and paternal disappointment. "You destroyed your own career through your choices. I'm trying to save the company and the jobs of everyone who depends on Sterling Financial's success." Marcus's voice carried a note of professional sympathy as he addressed Jessica directly. "Ms. Sterling, your MBA education and strategic thinking capabilities are valuable assets. However, claiming credit for work you didn't perform and excluding colleagues from recognition they earned reflects fundamental character issues that make you unsuitable for senior leadership positions." Timothy Walsh added, "We're prepared to provide positive references for your technical knowledge and analytical capabilities, but we cannot recommend you for roles requiring project leadership or team management." The devastating assessment landed with surgical precision. Jessica's professional reputation would survive, but her leadership ambitions had been systematically dismantled by evidence of systematic dishonesty and workplace harassment.
Amanda Brooks turned her attention to me, her expression showing professional respect that acknowledged expertise finally receiving appropriate recognition. Ms. Williams, in addition to the Senior Vice President position at Sterling Financial Blackstone Capital, would like to offer you an alternative opportunity. We're establishing a rural telecommunications investment fund, and we need someone with your market expertise to serve as managing partner. The offer struck me speechless. In the span of 2 hours, I had gone from enduring humiliation about my coffee-stained blazer to receiving partnership offers from one of the most prestigious investment firms in American finance. Marcus smiled for the first time during our call, his expression showing genuine appreciation for expertise that aligned with Blackstone Capital's investment philosophy. Ms. Williams, your field research represents exactly the kind of operational intelligence we value in partners. Whether you choose to remain with Sterling Financial or join Blackstone Capital, we're confident this partnership will succeed under your leadership. David Sterling looked at me with obvious respect and gratitude. Marianne, whatever you decide, you have my complete support. You've earned every opportunity being offered today. Jessica sat frozen in her chair, processing the complete reversal of her professional prospects. 3 hours earlier, she had been positioned as project leader for a $2 billion merger. Now she faced unemployment and professional disgrace, while the woman she had mocked for her appearance had become the key to Sterling Financial's future. I looked around the conference room, seeing the marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows with new perspective. The coffee stain on my blazer no longer represented professional inadequacy. It represented authentic expertise that had been systematically undervalued until integrity demanded recognition. I'd like 48 hours to consider the Blackstone Capital offer, I said finally. Regardless of my decision, I'm grateful for the recognition and the opportunity to lead this project forward. Marcus nodded approvingly. Of course. Excellence deserves appropriate consideration and compensation. We look forward to working with you, whether as Sterling Financial's Senior Vice President or as Blackstone Capital's newest managing partner. 6 months later, I sat in my corner office at Blackstone Capital, wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit that I had purchased with my first partner bonus. The view from the 32nd floor overlooked Seattle's financial district, where Sterling Financial continued operating under new management that prioritized expertise over nepotism. My assistant knocked softly before entering with the morning's investment proposals. The Rural Broadband Expansion Fund received 12 new applications this week, she reported. The Montana project is ahead of schedule, and the Wyoming infrastructure development is generating returns that exceed projections. I smiled, thinking about the communities I had visited over 18 months of field research. Those relationships had become the foundation for an investment strategy that was transforming rural telecommunications across 15 states while generating substantial returns for Blackstone Capital's investors. My phone buzzed with a text message from Commissioner Hendricks in Montana. The new fiber optic network in Billings is exceeding usage projections by 30%. Thank you for making this possible. Through my office windows, I could see construction crews working on a telecommunications tower that would extend high-speed internet access to 3 rural communities. The project represented exactly the kind of strategic investment that Marcus Wellington had envisioned when he offered me partnership in Blackstone Capital. Excellence, integrity, and persistence had ultimately triumphed over privilege, nepotism, and systematic injustice. The coffee stain on my old blazer had been transformed from a source of shame into a symbol of authentic expertise that no amount of designer clothing could replicate or replace. The most satisfying aspect of my transformation wasn't the financial success or professional recognition, though both were gratifying after years of being overlooked and undervalued. The true satisfaction came from knowing that my expertise was finally being used to serve communities that had been ignored by traditional telecommunications providers. Rural families could now access educational opportunities online. Ranchers could monitor livestock through digital systems, and small businesses could compete in global markets through reliable internet connections. My 18 months of field research had become the foundation for investment strategies that were generating both profit and positive social impact. As I reviewed the morning's investment proposals, I reflected on the lesson that had emerged from my experience at Sterling Financial. True professional success comes from competence, integrity, and the courage to demand recognition for your contributions. When you know your worth and can demonstrate your expertise, others will eventually recognize your value. Those who fail to appreciate your talents don't deserve your presence or your efforts. The business world ultimately rewards substance over style, expertise over connections, and integrity over political maneuvering. Sometimes that justice requires patience. Sometimes it demands courage, and sometimes it arrives through unexpected channels. But excellence combined with persistence creates opportunities that transcend temporary setbacks and systematic unfairness. My story reminds me that professional vindication often comes not from changing other people's behavior, but from finding environments where your expertise is valued and your contributions are recognized appropriately. The companies and leaders who fail to recognize talent will ultimately suffer competitive disadvantages, while those who reward expertise and integrity will attract the best people and achieve the greatest success. What workplace injustices have you experienced, and how did you overcome them? Have you ever had to choose between accepting unfair treatment and standing up for your professional worth? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if it resonated with your own career journey. Subscribe for more stories about professional resilience and workplace justice, and share this with anyone who needs encouragement to value their own expertise and demand appropriate recognition. Remember, your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. It's demonstrated by your competence, integrity, and willingness to seek environments where your talents can flourish. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage and success in demanding the professional recognition you deserve.